Hello, my name is Yvette M. Pino, and I am an Army veteran, an artist, a printmaker, and a curator. I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I was stationed at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, where I served 2 tours in Iraq. Until recently, Madison, Wisconsin was my home base, but in 2022, my wife and I relocated to Raleigh, North Carolina. I am very humbled to share my work with all of you today. Since 2017, I've been the curator of veteran art at the Wisconsin Veterans Museum in Madison, Wisconsin. And although I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina, I still continue to consult with the museum on a weekly basis. Also, for the last 12 years, I've run the Veteran Print Project, which pairs artists with veterans to share a dialogue. And from that conversation, an artist is inspired to create an edition of fine art prints. This is the work that I'm most well known for, and I'm very proud of everything that we've accomplished. In our collection, we have over 150 prints telling the stories of over 150 veterans. I welcome you to take some time and visit our website and see many prints like you're seeing today. You can see the address to our website here at veteranprintproject.com. However, for today, I'd like to share with you my thoughts on the recent work I'm creating as a practicing artist. My work is actually in transition. It's transitioning from using the visual language that reflects my military experiences toward new investigations of celebrated topics within my family's lineage and family folklore. What I'm seeking to gain is an understanding my family's behaviors that ultimately choose to reject our Mexican lineage in favor of elevating our Spanish heritage. This work, well, it's an attempt. It's an attempt to create a visual defense and fight back against that denial of my identity. After years of considering the realities of the celebrated militarism in this country and my role within that narrative, I'm yearning to return to roots of my own personal history. And like many in our communities today, I'm considering new ways to commemorate the past, ways that don't expect us or require us to build monuments to worship, or trying to find this need to find a hero to promote. Now you're going to see many layered symbols within my work. And I'll explain a little bit about the symbols, but these symbols are drawn from personal trauma, generational family trauma, and also the amplified collective trauma of society in the last 3 to 5 years. And what I'm hoping is that maybe throughout this new process, I'm going to create a designated space for me to remember, because really that's all I want. I want to create designated spaces to remember. So I'm going to focus on just one print for this presentation, and it's a recent print, and I think it's most relevant for the conference at which you are kindly hosting my artist talk here on this platform. So I'm going to focus on this recent print. It's from 2019, and I'm going to give you a little backstory on it. And as I'm giving you backstory, you're going to see images of preliminary drawings, preliminary sketches that led to the creation of this final composition. That was printed on combat paper, which is paper made from a military uniform. This is printed on white paper. In 2019, I was honored to be asked to participate in the Instituto Gráfico de Chicago and Marimacha Monarca Press's portfolio exchange for the 2019 Gravadolandia Printmaking Festival in Chicago. The theme was Conjuring Crossroads, time traveling with this bridge called my back. You can see the call for artists here. And this portfolio we were asked as artists to re-envision history with the writings in this bridge called my back, and to respond visually to the essays or the topics covered in the book you see here, and to illustrate the bridge between our ancestors and future generations. Now, participation in this exchange, it challenged me. It challenged me like nothing before. And as I began reading the essays in this book, I was struck just how little I knew, how little I knew about the writings by radical women of color, how little I knew about myself, and how little I knew about all of the work that had done before me to allow me to have this voice that I have today. I was also realized that we still have such little room to amplify our voices right now. So part of what I recognized in what I was reading was a silencing, and a silencing that was not solely caused by society, but in fact, a silencing that was a self-inflicted gag order perpetuated by women to each other based off of societal constructs, patriarchal narratives. And at least for me, this silencing was a combination of cultural dictums guiding the women in our family to be our own worst enemies, whose only idea of love is to empower men, some of them who are abusers, not all of the men, but to empower men and to criticize and require perfection from our daughters. And I say that in all caps, criticize and require perfection from our daughters. One of the essays in this bridge called My Back that struck a chord with me was written by Aurora Levins Morales, and it's called And Even Fidel Can't Change That. There are many elements within this writing that caught my attention, things like the experience of the confusing messaging offered to us by the women who raise us. While I was reading the essay, my sister and my niece and I had been recently talking about this idea of generational trauma. Can we, in fact, inherit post-traumatic stress? Can anxieties or traumas that are amplified during pregnancy actually be passed on into the womb? Can mental illness be nurtured while we are in the womb and pretty much become our inheritance? These are the things that had me thinking while I was reading these essays. In Morales's essay, in my interpretation of it, it was hitting some of these points. And I want to share with you the final sentiment of this essay that became really the basis, the inspiration for this print. And while I'm reading this, Morales's words, I'll just be showing you some of these preliminary sketches that were going through my mind. When I'm writing this, I am browner than I have ever been. Spanish ripples on my tongue, and I want the accent. Facing up to the tear, ending the denial, refusing to obey the rule, don't talk bad about your own people in front of anyone else. I'd never learned to dance salsa. My body goes rigid when the music plays. Oh, yes, I tap my feet and then I do a few steps, swing around the room when someone who doesn't know more than I do. But if I'm in a Latin scene, I freeze. I can't make my hips fluid or keep my feet from tripping. It's the perversion of sexuality that frightens me. It's the way the women around me exude a sexiness that has nothing to do with the heart. Of course, Latin women love as well as any other women. But while the chilliest Anglo-Saxon repression of sex pretends it simply doesn't exist, Latin repression says it's a filthy fact of life. Use it for what it's worth. Shake it in its face. Wear it as a decoy. It's all over the floor, and it's cold, and it's savage. It's the hatred of the powerless turned crooked. Sitting in the kitchen in not-so-white New Hampshire with old friends, mother and daughter, Ceci says, it takes 3 generations. If you resolve your relationship with your mother, you'll both change, and your daughter will have it easier. But her daughter will be raised differently. In the 3rd generation, the daughters are free. I'm not thinking of this essay then, but days later, when I sit down again to work, the phrase keeps ringing. In the 3rd generation, the daughters are free. Now here's a quote from an older woman in Portrait of Teresa, a Cuban film in 1979. Don't you think I've swallowed my mouthful of blood? It's different for a man. You're too stubborn. You've always wanted your own way. It was this way for my grandmother. It was this way for my mother. It was this way for me because this is the way it is. God made men and women different, and even Fidel can't change that. Anything is better than being alone. These are the final words of Morales in this essay. The relationship between mother and daughter stands in the center of what I fear most in our culture. Heal the wound and we change the world. Heal that wound and we change the world. A revolution capable of healing our wounds. If we're the ones who can imagine it, if we're the ones who dream about it, if we're the ones who need it most, then no one else can do it. We're the ones. Yeah, to say I was honored to participate in this portfolio is an understatement. So this print that came out of this, let me describe it to you. You've been seeing some of the preliminary sketches, and you're going to see this returning skull, broken neck. And I want to explain what that's about because it is important to the story of this print. In 1994, my mother was involved in a car accident that left her quadriplegic, paralyzed from the neck down. I was 17 years old, and that accident happened the summer before my senior year of high school. My sister was 21 years old and had given birth to her first child, my niece, who I referred to earlier, just 2 weeks before this car accident. As a result of my mother's injuries, me, my sister, her husband, and newborn now were in charge of caring for my mother. There's so many more elements to this story, things that time will not allow me to share right now. But you need to know about my mother before the car accident. She spent her life dressed to the nines, hair always perfectly coiffed, clothes formally tailored, makeup always on. We were required to do the same. So when she woke from this coma and realized she was paralyzed and that we were going to have to be her caretakers for the rest of her life, she became this scared, very scared little girl. And the roles of mother and daughter reversed. Now, there's so many elements to our strict upbringing, my grandmother raising my mother raising us, that now can be perceived as the ultimate form of cruelty. My mother and granny could be very critical and very cruel. And in my mother's new vulnerable state, it revealed her fear. It revealed that she had been scared all along, that her life was just a series of dress up and make believe and a valiant effort to hide her want to be different, to hide her want to not be so cruel. I always saw this moment, this revelation, as her taking off this mask and revealing to me who she truly was. And I sadly was devastated. When I was getting ready to make this print, I showed my niece this preliminary drawing and I asked her to collaborate with me. I thought she's an award-winning poet who speaks a lot about what these women in this book were talking about. And I thought she probably had already read this or that these words would resonate with her. So I asked her to collaborate with me and write a poem, and I would create the imagery. And she agreed. And then I worried because you see, my niece is of this generation, this time where the youth are empowered to say what they feel. And they are take no prisoners for calling out the oppressor, to calling us out, the generations of the complacent enablers. And I was fearful she would see past my facade as well. Her poems, they're sometimes filled with a lot of curse words and what I believed at the time to be crass vulgarisms of the culture that I was not allowed to associate with. So I will leave you with this. I will share with you the words that I was trying to come up with to describe this print. And in my synthesis for that, it came out more poetic than prose. So I'm going to read you my words of the description of the print, and then I will end, rather than trying to speak the words of my niece, I will end with the words of her poem scrolling on the screen. The words that I started writing in this draft of the drawing, adding to the poem that she found from the imagery I created. So first, these are my words describing this print. The hypocrisy of child-rearing doctrine in a feminine-led patriarchal household. The confusing language of self-respect when there is none practiced. Sending mixed messages, prancing around like confident, strong women only to be hiding behind creased-legged, overly ironed jeans and face covered in makeup. Hair done every Saturday with special pillows to sleep on. Forcing me to wax my upper lip before my 12th birthday, sending my sister in to shame me while I'm in a bathing suit, pointing out my hairy legs, my hairy back, making me shave far too early, so the pores remember to grow back thicker hair at a higher frequency, so that when I develop polycystic ovarian disease, I'm too ashamed to find out that my symptoms were symptoms and not the results of poor hygiene that you made me believe I had because my skin was darker than everybody else's in the family. You would not teach me Spanish, and you made me think white was better. And in reality, all it was a big facade for you to fit in because you could not face your own insecurity and could not embrace the heritage of your bloodline, but elevated the folklore of the master, of the oppressor, of the rapist, of the family that put him up for adoption with no roots of the tree to tell the tale, except we get all giddy that the mother was known as Doña, which symbolized class, upper class, the upper class that we were fed to seek out, that we were made to love, that we were made to move to, be surrounded by it, and to leave the barrio, only to hear my mother say over and over and over, to hear my mother say, you can take a man out of the barrio, but you can't take the barrio out of the man, as if it was my father's greatest flaw that he could not completely walk away. We moved up to the Northeast Heights to live with the rich white folk, but we left our grandmothers in the hood. One of them in the tiniest of rented houses with drug dealers and drive-bys. And instead of worrying, my dad tells stories of how mean Granny was to the punks on the block and how she would scare them with firecrackers. How scared was she? She could not read, she could not write, she could not drive, and so she had to have her son come by every few days to read her mail. Did she know she was a prisoner to her own son? Did she know he had a PhD and probably the means to move her somewhere safer? Did he try? Did she refuse to go? Did she want to remain to remind him who he really was? We work so hard at grinding the grindstone to make the grain do what we want, to grind it down to submission for mass commodification. We work so hard grinding the grindstone that we cannot see we are simply tightening the choker of the collar of beauty, and in the end, we're strangling ourselves, and we become our own oppressor until we crack the C3 and the C4 only to bruise the cord and render us paralyzed. We are still breathing, but barely. And mostly, we're in need of someone or something else to feed us oxygen. And we hand this mentality down from generation to generation to generation until one day, one of us sees right through it and says, no more. Only we find out that we're paralyzed too. Because out of love or something we can't walk away from, we're forced to spend eternity watching it unfold before our very eyes in a loop, repeated over and over and over, while we try to close our eyes, unaware that our eyes have been gone for decades, leaving only the blackened pit, deep cavernous sockets, spiraling more viewers in to witness this same hypnotic loop.